Growing up black during the Jim Crow era meant learning a completely different set of rules that white children never had to understand. If you lived through those times as a child, certain experiences shaped your world in ways that today's generation can't fully comprehend. These weren't just inconveniences or minor differences. They were the reality that defined how you moved through the world, how you learned to protect yourself, and how you discovered what it meant to be strong. Here are 15 signs that you lived through the Jim Crow era as a black child. You learned which water fountains you could and couldn't use. Understanding the colored and white signs wasn't just about reading. It was about survival in a world that made your worth clear through something as basic as drinking water. As a black child during Jim Crow, you learned early that the water fountains with colored signs were often broken, had weaker pressure, or provided lukewarm water that didn't refresh you at all. But you drank from them anyway, because that was the rule. And breaking that rule had consequences your parents couldn't protect you from. You watched white children drink from clean, cold fountains just feet away, and you learned to swallow both your thirst and your questions. The signs weren't just about water. They were daily reminders that the world saw you as less deserving of basic comfort. For black children growing up during this time, those water fountains became symbols of a larger system that would follow them everywhere they went. Your parents taught you to look down when white people passed by. Respect in the Jim Crow South had nothing to do with mutual regard. It was about knowing your place and keeping yourself safe. Black children learned early that making direct eye contact with white adults, especially white men, was seen as defiance or disrespect that could lead to serious trouble. Your parents taught you to lower your gaze, step aside on sidewalks, and say, "Yes, sir," and "No, ma'am," even to white children younger than yourself. This wasn't weakness. It was survival strategy passed down through generations who had learned the deadly cost of being seen as uppity. Walking down the street became a performance where you had to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that barely tolerated your presence. Those lessons stayed with you long after the laws changed, creating habits that protected you but also reminded you daily of a time when your dignity was something you had to hide to stay alive. You went to schools with hand-me-down textbooks and broken windows. Separate was never equal, and nowhere was this more obvious than in the schools black children attended during Jim Crow. Your classrooms had textbooks that were falling apart, often decades old, with pages missing and covers torn from years of use in white schools before being passed down. The windows might have been broken or cracked, letting in rain during storms and making winter days unbearably cold. Your teachers, despite being well-educated and deeply committed, had to work miracles with resources that would have been considered inadequate anywhere else. Lab equipment was non-existent, library books were outdated, and school supplies came from whatever your family could scrape together. Yet those same teachers created environments where learning flourished despite the obstacles, proving that excellence could emerge from the most challenging circumstances. For black children of that era, education became something you fought for, rather than something you were simply given. You rode in the back of buses or stood when the front was full. The bus wasn't just transportation, it was a daily lesson in how society valued your presence. As a black child during Jim Crow, you learned that your place was in the back seats, no matter how empty the front might be. If the bus filled up and white passengers needed seats, you stood while they sat, even if you had been there first. You watched your parents give up their seats after long days of work, their faces showing exhaustion and resignation, but never protest. The back of the bus became familiar territory where black passengers created their own community, talking quietly and sharing stories, while the front remained a forbidden zone. Bus rides weren't just about getting from one place to another. They were daily reminders of where you stood in a world that had mapped out your worth before you even understood what worth meant. Your family shopped quickly in white-owned stores and avoided trying on clothes. Shopping during Jim Crow required strategy, speed, and the acceptance that customer service wasn't meant for you. Black families entered white-owned stores with purpose, knowing exactly what they needed because browsing was discouraged or forbidden. Children learned to keep their hands to themselves, not to touch merchandise casually, and to speak only when spoken to. Trying on clothes was often prohibited, meaning your family had to guess at sizes and accept that returns might not be possible. Store clerks watched your every move with suspicion, making it clear that your money was welcome, but your presence was merely tolerated. Your parents taught you to gather what you needed quickly, pay without argument, and leave with dignity intact. Those shopping trips became exercises in maintaining composure while being treated as a threat rather than a customer. You couldn't use public pools, beaches, or parks in your town. Summer fun during Jim Crow came with geographical limitations that white children never had to consider. Public pools, beaches, and parks had invisible barriers that kept black children out, leaving you to find recreation in spaces that were often underfunded or non-existent. Hot summer days meant finding relief wherever you could: fire hydrants, creeks, or the occasional community center that served black families. You watched white children splash in clean pools and play on well-maintained playgrounds while you made do with whatever was available. Those limitations taught black children to be creative with entertainment, to find joy in simple things, and to create community in spaces others had abandoned. The exclusion was painful, but it also built resilience and resourcefulness that served you throughout your life. You learned which neighborhoods you could walk through safely. Navigation during Jim Crow wasn't just about knowing directions. It was about understanding which streets welcomed you and which ones posed danger. Black children learned early to memorize safe routes to school, church, or the store, avoiding neighborhoods where their presence might be seen as a threat. Sunset brought additional restrictions, as being in certain areas after dark could lead to confrontations that your family couldn't protect you from. You walked with purpose, kept your head down, and never wandered aimlessly through unfamiliar territory. Those geographic boundaries became mental maps that shaped how you moved through the world, creating invisible walls that lasted long after the legal barriers fell. Every journey outside your neighborhood required careful planning and constant awareness of who was watching and why. Your parents worked jobs that kept them invisible to white society. Employment during Jim Crow often meant that black parents worked in positions that rendered them nearly invisible to the white families who employed them. Domestic workers entered homes through back doors. Agricultural workers labored in fields far from view, and service workers remained in kitchens and cleaning areas. Children understood that their parents possessed skills and intelligence that went unrecognized in their official roles. Your mother might have been managing entire households while being paid as a cleaning woman, or your father might have been solving complex problems while being credited as simple manual labor. Those jobs provided necessary income, but often came with indignities that parents absorbed to ensure their children had opportunities for better futures. Black children learned early that work was about survival, and dignity was something you maintained privately. You attended church where preachers spoke in code about freedom and justice. Church during Jim Crow served multiple purposes: spiritual sanctuary, community center, and safe space for discussions about justice and freedom. Black children sat in pews listening to sermons that seemed to be about biblical stories, but carried messages about current struggles for equality. Preachers spoke carefully, using biblical metaphors to address social injustice without directly challenging the system that monitored their words. Songs about freedom and deliverance took on meanings that extended far beyond spiritual salvation. Church became the place where hope was nurtured and community strength was built, where black children learned that dignity and worth came from sources higher than earthly laws. Those Sunday messages planted seeds of resilience and resistance that would grow throughout their lives. You saw colored-only and whites-only signs everywhere. Signage during Jim Crow created a landscape of exclusion that black children had to navigate daily. Whites-only and colored-only signs marked everything from restrooms and restaurants to hotels and hospitals. Learning to read meant understanding which doors were open to you and which were forever closed. Those signs weren't just information. They were constant reminders of your place in a society that had codified your second-class status. Black children became experts at finding alternative options, knowing where they could eat, sleep, and receive medical care when traveling. The signs created a parallel world where black families built their own institutions and support systems. Reading those signs taught painful lessons about exclusion, while also revealing the strength of communities that thrived despite being pushed to the margins. Your family traveled with food and planned routes around sundown towns. Road trips during Jim Crow required military-level planning because the open road wasn't open to everyone. Black families packed food for entire journeys because restaurants along the way wouldn't serve them. The Green Book became essential reading, providing lists of black-owned businesses and safe lodging options. Sundown towns, places where black people were expected to leave before dark, had to be avoided or passed through quickly during daylight hours. Children learned that adventure came with risk, that spontaneous stops weren't possible, and that even vacations required careful strategy. Car travel meant staying alert, keeping gas tanks full, and having backup plans for every leg of the journey. Those family road trips taught lessons about preparation, community support, and the determination required to claim space in a world that tried to limit your movement. You watched your parents bite their tongues when treated unfairly. Witnessing injustice while being powerless to respond was one of the most difficult aspects of growing up during Jim Crow. Black children watched their parents endure insults, disrespect, and unfair treatment while maintaining composure for the sake of safety. You learned that speaking up could lead to consequences that affected the entire family, so silence became a form of protection. Your parents' restraint wasn't weakness. It was strategic survival that allowed them to come home safely each day. Those moments taught complex lessons about dignity, about choosing battles wisely, and about the different ways people could resist oppression. Children learned to channel their anger into determination, understanding that their parents' sacrifices were investments in futures where speaking up might finally be possible. You learned to be twice as good to get half as much recognition. Excellence became the minimum standard for Black children during Jim Crow's, because mediocrity wasn't acceptable when society was looking for reasons to dismiss your potential. You learned that your grades had to be perfect, your behavior had to be flawless, and your achievements had to be undeniable just to receive basic recognition. Teachers and parents instilled the understanding that you would have to work harder than your white peers to achieve the same opportunities. This wasn't fair, but it was reality, and Black children rose to meet those impossible standards. That pressure created generations of high achievers who understood that success required not just talent, but also persistence, discipline, and the ability to maintain excellence under scrutiny. The lesson was painful, but powerful. If you were going to succeed, you had to be undeniably good at whatever you chose to do. You experienced holidays and celebrations within your own community. Celebrations during Jim Crow happened within the bounds of Black communities because integrated festivities weren't welcome or safe. 4th of July picnics, Christmas programs, and graduation ceremonies took place in Black churches, schools, and community centers. Those celebrations became even more meaningful because they represented spaces where Black children could experience pure joy without the tension of navigating white spaces. Community talent shows, church programs, and school plays provided stages where Black children could shine without limitation. Those celebrations built traditions that strengthened community bonds and created memories of unfiltered happiness. The exclusion from mainstream celebrations led to the creation of richer, more meaningful traditions within Black communities. You learned that speaking up could cost your family everything. Perhaps the most sobering lesson of growing up during Jim Crow was understanding that courage came with consequences that extended beyond the individual. Black children learned that challenging unfair treatment could result in job loss for parents, eviction from homes, or worse. You watched your parents make careful calculations about when to speak and when to remain silent, understanding that their primary responsibility was keeping the family safe. This didn't mean accepting injustice passively. It meant finding strategic ways to resist that didn't put loved ones at risk. Children learn to channel their frustration into education, into building strong communities, and into preparing for a future where their voices might carry more power. The silence was temporary, but the strength built during those years would fuel the movements that eventually changed everything. These experiences shaped a generation that understood both struggle and strength in ways that are hard to imagine today. If you lived through Jim Crow as a black child, you learned lessons about dignity, community, and resilience that no textbook could teach. You discovered that worth comes from within, that communities can flourish even under oppression, and that patience and strategy sometimes accomplish more than immediate confrontation. Those experiences, as painful as they were, created the foundation for the civil rights movement and the progress that followed. Which of these signs resonates most deeply with your own memories? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor the strength and wisdom of those who paved the way for the freedoms we have today.